A virgin at 18, she became the obsession of the most sought-after millionaire and sparked a love. The autumn rain fell steadily over Boston's cobblestone streets, turning the early evening into a blur of golden streetlights and hurrying figures hunched under umbrellas. Among them, Callie Hart clutched her backpack closer, quickening her pace as she made her way home from her evening environmental science class at Boston University. At 18, Callie carried herself with a quiet confidence that seemed beyond her years. Her honey-blonde highlighted braids were partially tucked into her oversized cream sweater, and her Converse sneakers splashed through puddles as she walked. The familiar scent of her daisy perfume mingled with the rain-soaked air, a comforting reminder of home. She'd chosen to attend college in Boston, despite her mother Angela's initial hesitation about her only daughter moving so far from their home in Atlanta. But Callie had always been different, thoughtful, determined, and unafraid to chart her own course. The scholarship had sealed the deal, and now 3 months into her freshman year, she was slowly finding her rhythm in this historic city. Just 2 more blocks, she muttered to herself, adjusting her umbrella against a sudden gust of wind. That's when she heard it, a soft whimper coming from the narrow alley between a coffee shop and a bookstore. Callie hesitated. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, warning her about the dangers of dark alleys in big cities, but another whimper, more desperate this time, made the decision for her. Pulling out her phone's flashlight, she cautiously approached the sound. There, huddled against a dumpster, was a golden retriever. The dog's fur was matted with rain and mud, and he held one paw slightly off the ground. A costly-looking collar hung loosely around his neck, but no tags were visible. "Hey there," Callie said softly, crouching down. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The dog's eyes, warm and brown, met hers with a mixture of fear and hope. Growing up, she'd always wanted a dog, but their apartment complex in Atlanta hadn't allowed pets. Still, she'd spent countless hours volunteering at the local shelter, learning how to approach and handle scared animals. The dog watched her warily as she slowly extended her hand, palm up. After a tense moment, he stretched his neck forward and sniffed her fingers. His tail gave a tentative wag. "That's it. Good boy," Callie murmured. "Let's get you somewhere warm and dry." She shrugged off her backpack and pulled out her water bottle and a protein bar. The dog accepted both gratefully, and after a few minutes of gentle coaxing, allowed her to check his collar. No tags, but the leather was expensive, with subtle brass hardware that spoke of quality. Making a quick decision, Callie called her downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who she knew had 2 dogs of her own. "Hi, Mrs. R. It's Callie from 3B. I found an injured dog. Yes, I know it's getting late. Would you happen to have any spare dog food?" 10 minutes later, she was carefully helping the limping dog up the stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment. Her small studio wasn't much, just enough room for a bed, a compact desk, and a tiny kitchenette, but it was warm and dry. Mrs. Rodriguez met them at the door with a bowl of kibble and some old towels. "Oh, pobrecito," the older woman clucked sympathetically. "He's beautiful. Must belong to someone with money. Look at that collar." Callie nodded, gently toweling the dog dry. "I'll take him to a vet first thing tomorrow to check for a microchip. He seems to have hurt his paw, but I don't think it's broken." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Callie settled the dog on a makeshift bed of towels near her radiator. She snapped a few photos and posted them on local lost pet websites, then called her mum. "Baby girl, you did what?" Angela Hart's rich voice carried equal parts concern and pride. "I couldn't leave him out there, Mum," Callie explained, watching as the dog dozed off, his breathing finally steady. "You always taught me that character is how we act when no one's watching." Angela's soft laugh warmed her heart. "That I did. Just be careful, sweetie. Make sure you take him to get scanned for a chip tomorrow." "I will. Love you, Mum. Love you too, baby. You're a good soul just like your daddy was." After hanging up, Callie changed into her favorite oversized t-shirt and leggings, then settled at her desk to finish her environmental science paper. The rain continued to fall outside, but her small apartment felt cozy with her unexpected guest. As she typed, she could hear the dog's gentle snoring, and something about the sound made her smile. What she couldn't know, was that this rainy night would change everything, that somewhere across the city, a man was worried sick about his missing dog, posting frantically on social media, that tomorrow, when she took the dog to the vet, fate would orchestrate a meeting that would challenge everything she believed about love, trust, and timing. For now, though, Callie was content with her simple act of kindness. She worked on her paper as the city lights glimmered through rain-streaked windows, unaware that sometimes the biggest changes in life start with the smallest choices. Around midnight, she finally closed her laptop and slipped into bed. The dog lifted his head, watching her with those soulful eyes. "Good night, buddy," she whispered. "We'll find your family tomorrow." She drifted off to sleep with the sound of rain against her windows and the steady breathing of her four-legged guest, not knowing that tomorrow would bring an encounter that would test her heart, her values, and everything she thought she knew about love. In another part of Boston, in a sleek high-rise apartment, Caleb Sterling paced his living room, phone in hand, worry etched across his features. His normally confident demeanor was nowhere to be seen as he checked his phone for the 100th time. No sign of Max, his beloved golden retriever, the one being that had taught him about unconditional love after his grandmother's passing. The irony wasn't lost on him. He, who had spent years avoiding real connections, was now sick with worry over a dog. But Max wasn't just any dog. He was the last gift his grandmother had given him before she passed away, a living reminder that love was worth the risk of loss. "Come on, buddy," he muttered, running a hand through his disheveled dark blonde hair. "Kai, where are you?" The rain continued to fall over Boston, connecting two souls who had yet to meet, setting in motion a story that would prove that sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with love at first sight, but with a simple act of kindness on a rainy night. Little did either of them know that tomorrow would change everything. That a lost dog would lead to a found connection, that two people from different worlds would discover that sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the mind catches up. But that was tomorrow's story. For now, the rain fell, the city slept, and destiny waited patiently for morning light. Morning light filtered through Boston's lingering clouds as Callie navigated the busy streets toward Brighton Veterinary Clinic. The golden retriever limped beside her, his injured paw carefully wrapped in a makeshift bandage she'd fashioned from her first aid kit. Despite his injury, his tail wagged gently, and his eyes remained fixed on her with unwavering trust. "Almost there, buddy," she murmured, adjusting her grip on the borrowed leash Mrs. Rodriguez had lent her. Her honey-blonde braids caught the morning light as she checked her phone's GPS one more time. The clinic was just around the corner, a modern building wedged between a coffee shop and a vintage record store. Inside, and the waiting room was quiet, with just a few early morning patients. An elderly woman cradling a Persian cat offered Callie a warm smile as she approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, looked up from her computer. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Hi, I found this dog last night," Callie explained, gesturing to her four-legged companion. "He's injured his paw, and I wanted to get him checked for a microchip." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly as she looked at the dog. "Oh, is this Max? We've been getting calls about him since last night. His owner has been—" The clinic's door chimed, cutting her off mid-sentence. Callie turned, and her heart skipped a beat. A man stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. His dark blonde hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it in frustration. His blue-gray eyes scanned the room urgently before landing on the golden retriever beside Callie. Relief flooded his features. "Max!" The dog's reaction was immediate. His tail began wagging furiously as he tried to move toward his owner, whimpering slightly when his injured paw touched the ground. The man crossed the room in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees beside the dog. "Hey, buddy! Easy!" he soothed, running his hands over Max's fur, checking for injuries. His voice was deep and warm, tinged with concern. When he looked up at Callie, their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. "So aren't you found him?" His question was soft, filled with gratitude. Callie nodded, suddenly very aware of her simple jeans and oversized sweater. The man before her was impeccably dressed in dark jeans and a charcoal blazer that fit him perfectly. A subtle scent of Bleu de Chanel surrounded him, sophisticated and masculine. "Last night, in an alley off Beacon Street," she explained. "He was hurt and scared, so I took him home. I posted his photos online, but I saw them this morning," he interrupted, standing up. At his full height, he towered over her, but there was something gentle in his expression. "I'm Caleb Sterling. Thank you for taking care of him." "Callie Hart," she replied, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened when he smiled. There was something magnetic about him, but also something guarded in his eyes, like he was used to keeping people at arm's length. The receptionist cleared her throat. Mr. Sterling, Dr. Mitchell can see Max now. Would you like to come back? Caleb nodded, then turned back to Callie. Would you mind coming with us? I'd like to know exactly what happened last night. In the exam room, Dr. Mitchell, a veterinarian with salt and pepper hair and gentle hands, examined Max's paw while Callie recounted finding him. As she spoke, she couldn't help but notice how Caleb listened intently, his eyes occasionally meeting hers with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. Just a mild sprain, Dr. Mitchell concluded. A few days of rest, and he'll be good as new. You did a good job with that temporary bandage, young lady. Callie smiled, remembering her volunteer days at the Atlanta shelter. I've had some experience with injured animals. She's being modest. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice came from the doorway. She'd arrived for her own dog's appointment and couldn't resist checking in. This girl has the kindest heart in Boston, took this big boy in without hesitation. Caleb's expression softened as he looked at Callie again, really seeing her this time. Beyond her natural beauty, there was a quiet strength in her bearing, an authenticity that he rarely encountered in his world of superficial connections and casual relationships. Let me repay you somehow, he said as they left the exam room. Dinner, maybe? Callie hesitated. Everything about him screamed sophisticated playboy, from his expensive clothes to his practiced charm. She'd heard enough stories from her mother about men who saw kindness as weakness, who mistook genuine care for naive vulnerability. That's not necessary, she replied carefully. I'm just glad Max is okay. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at being politely refused. He pulled out a business card, sleek and minimalist, and offered it to her. At least take my number, in case. He glanced down at Max, then back at her with a hint of a smile, in case he needs another guardian angel. Callie accepted the card, trying to ignore the slight tingle when their fingers brushed. Or maybe he'll need someone to remind you that a pet isn't just an accessory, she responded, surprising herself with her boldness. Caleb's eyebrows rose slightly, and for a moment, his carefully maintained facade cracked. No one usually spoke to him that directly. Women typically fell over themselves to impress him, not challenge him. You're different, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. I'm just honest, Callie replied, gathering her things. The morning light streaming through the clinic's windows caught her braids, creating a halo effect that made Caleb's breath catch unexpectedly. As she turned to leave, he called after her. Callie, she paused, looking back over her shoulder. Thank you, really. His voice was sincere, stripped of its earlier polish. She nodded, offering a small smile before stepping out into the morning sunshine. Her heart was beating a little faster than usual, and she told herself it was just the excitement of the morning, not the way Caleb's eyes had looked when he'd called her different. Back in the clinic, Caleb watched the door long after she'd gone, Max sitting patiently beside him. For the first time in years, he felt off balance, intrigued by someone who seemed completely unimpressed by the carefully constructed image he presented to the world. Come on, buddy, he said to Max, who looked up at him with knowing eyes. Let's get you home. But as they walked to his car, he couldn't shake the image of Callie's gentle hands bandaging Max's paw, or the way she'd seen right through his practiced charm. His phone felt heavy in his pocket, where he'd saved her number from the lost pet posting. In her small apartment, Callie placed Caleb's business card on her desk, telling herself she wouldn't call. She had midterms to focus on, and he clearly wasn't the type to want anything real, but as she sat down to study, her mind kept drifting back to the way his confident facade had cracked when she'd challenged him, revealing something vulnerable underneath. Neither of them knew it yet, but that morning at the veterinary clinic had set something in motion, something that would force them both to question everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the masks people wear to protect their hearts. The autumn sun continued to rise over Boston, warming the rain-washed streets, while two souls who had just met began the slow dance of discovering that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most profound connections. 3 days had passed since the veterinary clinic, and Callie was determined to focus on her studies. Her environmental science midterm loomed ahead, and she'd successfully convinced herself that the business card tucked in her desk drawer wasn't worth thinking about. But at 11:47 p.m., as she pored over her textbooks in her favorite 24-hour coffee shop near campus, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Max misses his guardian angel. Callie stared at the message, her heart doing an unexpected flip. She knew exactly who it was, even without the name saved in her contacts. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, debating whether to respond. Another message appeared. "This is Caleb Sterling, by the way. Hope it's not too late." She bit her lip, then typed, "How's his paw?" The response was immediate. "Much better. Though he keeps looking at the door like he's waiting for someone." Callie smiled despite herself, imagining the golden retriever's soulful eyes. Dogs are loyal like that, even to strangers who helped them once. Some strangers leave more of an impression than others. The subtle flirtation in his message made her pause. She'd heard enough about Caleb Sterling in the past few days. A quick Google search had revealed plenty. Successful businessman, regular face at high society events, always with a different date on his arm. The exact type of man her mother had warned her about. "Max is lucky to have an owner who cares so much," she replied diplomatically. "Would you like to see for yourself coffee tomorrow?" Callie's fingers tightened around her phone. The smart answer would be no, but before she could respond, the barista called out her name. As she got up to retrieve her drink, she noticed a familiar figure entering the cafe. Caleb stood in the doorway, his tall frame commanding attention even in casual clothes, dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look stormy. Their gazes met across the room, and surprise registered on both their faces. "Are you stalking me?" Callie asked as he approached, trying to keep her voice light despite her racing heart. Caleb's lips curved into a slight smile. "I could ask you the same thing. This is my regular late-night spot when I can't sleep." "Mine too." "Well, when I'm studying," she gestured to her textbook-covered table. "Environmental science." He read the title of her open book. "You're full of surprises, Callie Hart." "Why? Because I care about more than just—" She caught herself before finishing the sentence. "More than just what?" His eyes held a challenge. "More than just appearances," she finished quietly. Something shifted in his expression. "You really don't pull your punches, do you? Life's too short for games." She gathered her books, needing space from the intensity of his presence. "It was nice seeing you, Caleb. Have dinner with me." The word stopped her. She turned back, studying his face. "Why?" "Because you intrigue me," he admitted. "Because you look at me and see past all the—" He gestured vaguely at himself. "The stuff that usually works. That's not a good enough reason. Then have dinner with me because I want to know what makes someone stop in the rain to help a stranger's dog. Because I want to understand why you volunteer at shelters and study environmental science and drink coffee at midnight while other girls your age are out at clubs." His honesty caught her off guard. For a moment, the practiced charm fell away, and she glimpsed something real underneath, a longing for authenticity that matched her own. "One dinner," she said finally, "but not somewhere fancy. I want real food and real conversation." Relief and something else, excitement maybe, flashed across his face. "I know just the place. Tomorrow at 7? "Okay." She shouldered her backpack. "And Caleb? Leave the designer blazer at home." His laugh followed her out into the night, rich and genuine. As she walked home, her phone buzzed again. "Caleb, you just walked out before I could get your number." Callie smiled, adding his contact before replying, "Guess you'll have to trust that I'll show up tomorrow." In his penthouse apartment later that night, Caleb sat in his home office, unable to focus on work. Max lay at his feet, head resting on his expensive leather shoes. The dog looked up at him with knowing eyes. "Don't give me that look," Caleb muttered. "I know what I'm doing." But did he? For the first time in years, he felt off balance. Callie wasn't impressed by his wealth, his status, or his carefully cultivated charm. She saw through it all with those honest brown eyes, challenging him to be real. His phone lit up with a message from his latest casual interest, a model he'd been seeing on and off. He left it unanswered, his mind still on the way Callie's braids had caught the coffee shop's dim lighting, how her voice carried conviction when she spoke about things that mattered to her. Across town, in her small studio apartment, Callie called her mother. "Baby girl, you're up late." Angela's warm voice came through the line. "Mom, I think I might be making a mistake." "Tell me." Callie recounted the coffee shop encounter, her mother listening patiently. "You know what my grandma used to say?" Angela finally spoke. She said sometimes the biggest mistakes teach us the most important lessons. But sometimes, what looks like a mistake is just life pushing us out of our comfort zone. "He's not my type, Mom. He's all surface and show and yet you agreed to dinner," Angela interrupted gently. "Maybe because you see something else there, too." Callie sighed, looking out her window at the city lights. "Maybe. Just remember who you are, baby. Your heart is your compass. It won't lead you wrong." After hanging up, Callie pulled out her sketchbook. trying to capture the conflicting emotions swirling inside her. Her simple life had been comfortable, predictable. Now it felt like she was standing on the edge of something bigger, something that could either break her heart or open it to possibilities she'd never considered. Her phone buzzed one last time. Caleb, sweet dreams, guardian angel. She stared at the message, wondering if somewhere beneath his polished exterior and practiced lines there was a man capable of real connection. Tomorrow's dinner would be a test, not just of him, but of her own ability to stay true to herself while opening her heart to something new. Outside, Boston's night sky cleared, revealing stars that usually remained hidden behind city lights. Two souls lay awake in different parts of the city, both wondering if they were ready for what tomorrow might bring. One protected by walls built from wealth and casual encounters, the other by principles and careful choices. Neither knowing that sometimes the greatest love stories begin when we're brave enough to let those walls crack, just a little. At exactly 6:58 p.m., Callie stood outside Angelo's, a small Italian restaurant tucked away in Boston's North End. The evening air carried the scent of garlic and fresh bread, and strings of white lights twinkled overhead, crisscrossing the narrow cobblestone street. She'd chosen a simple floral dress that her mother had sent from Atlanta, paired with her trusty Converse. Comfortable, authentic, and completely herself. Her phone buzzed. Look up. Caleb was walking toward her, and true to her request, he'd left the designer blazer behind. Instead, he wore dark jeans and a simple white Henley that somehow made him look more striking than any expensive suit could. His usual confidence seemed slightly softened around the edges, more real. You came, he said, stopping in front of her. You sound surprised. Most people aren't this punctual. He gestured to the restaurant. How did you know about this place? Mrs. Rodriguez recommended it. She said it's where real Italians eat, not tourists or... She caught herself. Not people like me. His eyes held a hint of amusement. You can say it, Callie. I'm a walking cliché of privilege, right? She met his gaze steadily. Are you? Before he could answer, an elderly man burst through the restaurant's door, arms wide. Ah, the beautiful girl Mrs. Rodriguez told me about. He turned to Caleb with a knowing smile. You, young man, are punching above your weight class. Uncle Angelo, I presume. Callie laughed as the man ushered them inside. The restaurant was small but warm, with red-checkered tablecloths and vintage photos covering the walls. No fancy wine list, no sommelier, just generations of family recipes and stories hanging in the air like the scent of fresh herbs. My grandmother would have loved this place, Caleb said softly as they settled into a corner booth. Something in his voice made Callie look up from her menu. Tell me about her. He seemed surprised by the request. Most people want to know about my business ventures or social connections. I'm not most people. No, he agreed, studying her face in the candlelight. You're really not. And so, over plates of homemade pasta and glasses of house wine, Caleb Sterling began to let his carefully constructed walls slip. He told her about summers spent in his grandmother's kitchen, learning to make her secret recipe cheeseburgers, about how she'd been the only one who saw past his parents' expectations of perfection and success. She gave me Max, he said, twirling pasta around his fork, said everyone needs at least one relationship in their life that's completely unconditional. And have you found that besides Max? Callie asked, the wine making her bolder. Caleb's fingers tightened slightly around his glass. You don't waste time with easy questions, do you? Life's too short for small talk. No, he admitted finally. I haven't. It's easier to keep things casual, uncomplicated. Easier isn't always better. Their eyes met across the table, and something electric passed between them. Uncle Angelo chose that moment to appear with tiramisu, breaking the tension. On the house, he declared, for the girl who saves dogs and the boy who needs saving from himself. Caleb laughed, but there was an edge to it. Am I that transparent? Only to those who look with their hearts, not their eyes, the old man replied wisely, before disappearing back into the kitchen. As they shared the dessert, Callie told him about growing up in Atlanta, about helping her mother in the emergency room's free clinic, about learning early that real strength came from vulnerability, not power. My dad died when I was 6, she said, but Mom never let it break her. She taught me that love isn't about what you get, it's about what you're willing to give. Is that why you're different? Why you don't? He gestured vaguely. Why I don't fall for superficial charm and expensive dinners? She smiled. I'm not looking for a fairy tale, Caleb. I'm looking for something real. And what if real is messy, complicated? Then it's worth the risk. She set her fork down, but only if both people are willing to take it. The challenge in her words hung between them. Outside, a street musician began playing At Last on a saxophone, the melody drifting through the open windows. "Dance with me," Caleb said suddenly. "Here, now." He stood, offering his hand. No pretense, no show, just a dance. Callie hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. He pulled her close, their bodies swaying gently to the music. Other diners smiled, some joining in, turning the small restaurant into an impromptu dance floor. "You're trembling," he whispered. "Because this feels real," she admitted. "And real is scary." His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "I don't do scary, I don't do real, but with you," she pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "But with me, with you, I want to try." Uncle Angelo watched from the kitchen doorway, nodding approvingly. "Young love," he murmured to himself, "always starts with a good meal and an honest heart." Later, as they walked through the North End's winding streets, their hands brushed accidentally on purpose. Neither grabbed hold, but neither pulled away either. "Let me drive you home," Caleb offered. "I like walking," Callie replied. "Helps me think." "About what?" She stopped, turning to face him. "About whether I'm making a huge mistake by letting you in, even a little bit." His face softened in the streetlight. "I won't hurt you, Callie. Can you promise that?" "No," he said honestly, "but I can promise to try not to." She nodded, appreciating his honesty. "Good night, Caleb. Can I see you again?" "You have my number," she smiled, starting to walk away. "Callie," his voice made her turn back. "Thank you for making me leave the blazer at home." Her laugh echoed off the old brick buildings as she disappeared around the corner, leaving Caleb standing under the string lights, feeling more alive than he had in years. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with messages from his usual crowd, invitations to exclusive clubs, casual hookups, business networking events. For the first time, none of it appealed to him. Instead, he found himself typing, "Got home safe." Her reply came moments later. "Just walking up to my door now. Thank you for being real tonight. Can I be real again tomorrow?" "Let's start with being real tonight. Tomorrow will take care of itself." In her apartment, Callie touched her lips as still feeling the ghost of a smile. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Your heart is your compass." Tonight, that compass was pointing in a terrifying but exhilarating direction. As Boston's night settled around them, two people lay awake in their beds, both knowing that something had shifted. One learning that real connection was worth the risk of vulnerability, the other discovering that sometimes the strongest walls are the ones we choose to lower ourselves. 2 weeks after their dinner at Angelo's, Callie sat in her environmental science lecture, trying to focus on Professor Wilson's presentation about sustainable ecosystems. Her phone vibrated silently in her pocket, the fifth message from Caleb that morning. Their daily conversations had become as natural as breathing, ranging from philosophical debates to playful banter about his coffee addiction. She snuck a glance at the latest message. "Lunch. I found a food truck that makes authentic Southern mac and cheese. Made me think of you." A smile tugged at her lips. He'd been paying attention when she'd mentioned her mum's signature dish. Before she could reply, another message appeared. "Unless you're actually paying attention in class like the dedicated student you are." Rolling her eyes, she typed back, "Some of us take our education seriously, Mr. Sterling. Education is important, but so is proper nutrition. I'm just looking out for your well-being." As class ended, Callie gathered her books, her mind already made up, despite her pretense of hesitation. Outside the lecture hall, she found him leaning against his car, looking impossibly handsome in casual business attire, charcoal slacks and a light blue button-down with rolled sleeves. "Stalker," she teased, approaching him. "Strategic planner," he corrected, pushing off the car. "I knew your schedule. That's not less creepy." His laugh was interrupted by a sharp voice. "Caleb, what are you doing here?" They turned to see a stunning woman approaching, her designer heels clicking purposefully on the pavement. Recognition flickered across Caleb's face, followed by something like discomfort. "Victoria," he acknowledged. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," Victoria replied, her eyes scanning Callie with practiced dismissal. "I was meeting the dean about the charity gala. You remember, the one you're supposed to co-chair?" Callie felt Caleb tense beside her. She'd Googled him enough to know about his social obligations, the world of galas and fundraisers he navigated with practiced ease. Victoria clearly belonged to that world, with her perfect blonde hair and Louboutin heels. Right, Caleb said, his voice tight. I haven't forgotten. Good. We have a lot to discuss. Victoria's smile was all teeth. Maybe over dinner, like old times. Before Caleb could respond, Callie stepped back. I should go. You obviously have business to attend to. Callie, wait. Caleb reached for her hand, but she was already moving away. It's fine. I have studying to do anyway. She walked quickly across campus, her heart pounding. She'd known about his world, his past, but seeing it up close was different. Victoria's presence had transformed him, bringing back the polished facade she'd worked so hard to see beyond. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, but she ignored it. In her apartment, she found Mrs. Rodriguez waiting with a worried expression. Mijita, are you okay? You look upset. Callie managed a smile. I'm fine. Just realizing some things about that handsome boy who's been making you smile lately. His world is so different from mine, Mrs. R. Maybe I was naive to think, Ay, niña. Mrs. Rodriguez touched her cheek gently. Different worlds can make the strongest bridges if both people want to build them. Before Callie could respond, a knock echoed through her apartment. She opened the door to find Calabi slightly out of breath. You ran away, he said simply. I gave you space to handle your business. Victoria isn't my business, not anymore. But that world is, Callie countered. The galas, the social obligations, the expectations. That's not who I am with you. Then who are you, Caleb? Because I saw how you changed when she appeared, like you put on a mask I've been trying to help you take off. Mrs. Rodriguez quietly slipped out, but not before giving Caleb a pointed look that clearly said, fix this. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. You want honesty? Yes. That world is part of my life. Yes, I have obligations and expectations, but for the first time, I found someone who makes me want to be more than what that world expects. I won't be your escape, Caleb. I won't be your secret refuge from a life you're afraid to change. Is that what you think this is? He stepped closer, his eyes intense. You're not my escapist, Callie. You're my wake-up call. She crossed her arms, protecting her heart. Prove it. Come to the gala. The request surprised her. Be that what? Not as my date, as my partner. Help me make it about more than just social climbing and empty gestures. We can redirect the funds to actual environmental causes, local shelters, things that matter. You'd do that? I'd do a lot of things to keep you looking at me the way you did at Angelo's. His voice softened. The way you're not looking at me right now. Callie uncrossed her arms slowly. I won't change who I am, not even for you. I don't want you to change. I want you to help me change things that need changing. A moment passed between them, heavy with possibility. Finally, Callie spoke. I have conditions. Name them. 1. I wear what I want. No fancy stylist. He nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. 2. We really make it count. Not just token donations, but real impact. Done. And 3. She stepped closer, looking up at him. No more masks. Not with me. Caleb's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. I'm starting to forget how to wear them around you anyway. The tension between them crackled, months of careful restraint wearing thin, but before either could move, Max's bark echoed from the hallway, where Mrs. Rodriguez was failing to contain him. They broke apart, laughing as the dog bounded in, tail wagging frantically. You brought him? Callie asked, kneeling to greet Max. He's my backup, in case you were too mad to listen. She scratched behind Max's ears, smiling. Smart man. I'm learning. Caleb watched them together, something warm unfurling in his chest. So, about that mac and cheese. Now you're just trying to bribe me. Is it working? She stood, grabbing her bag. Maybe. But I'm paying for my own lunch. Always with the conditions, he murmured, but his smile was genuine. As they left her apartment, Mrs. Rodriguez watched from her doorway, nodding approvingly. Different worlds, she whispered to herself. But maybe that's exactly what they both need. The afternoon sun bathed Boston in golden light as they walked to the food truck, Max trotting happily between them. Their hands brushed occasionally, each touch a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone see us exactly as we are, masks off, hearts uncertain, but willing to try. The autumn sun painted long shadows across Caleb's penthouse as he paced his home office, phone pressed to his ear. Max watched from his bed by the window, head tilted at his owner's obvious distress. Mother, I understand your concerns, but... He pinched the bridge of his nose. No, I haven't lost my mind. I'm actually thinking clearly for the first time. The voice on the other end grew sharper. Darling, Victoria called me. She's worried about you. This dalliance with a college student. It's beneath you. Her name is Callie. Caleb's voice hardened. And she's not a dalliance. She's a child playing in an adult world. The gala committee is in uproar over your proposed changes. Environmental causes? Animal shelters? This isn't what the sterling name stands for. Maybe it should be. He stopped pacing, looking out over the Boston skyline. Maybe it's time for change. Don't throw away everything we've built for some girl with idealistic notions. Goodbye, Mother. He ended the call, dropping into his leather chair with a heavy sigh. His phone buzzed with a text from Callie. Just finished my meeting with the shelter directors. They're excited about the partnership opportunity. Still on for dinner. Looking at her message, a smile replaced his frown. Before he could reply, his office door opened. Richard Sterling, his father, stood there in an impeccable suit, face set in stern lines. Your mother called. Of course she did. Caleb stood. Dad, I'm not changing my mind. Son, I've indulged your rebellious phases before, but this is different. The gala isn't just a party. It's about connections, influence, power. Maybe that's the problem. Caleb met his father's gaze. When was the last time we used that influence for something that actually mattered? We've built an empire. Built on what? Empty networking and superficial relationships. He ran a hand through his hair. Callie showed me something different. Something real. Real doesn't pay the bills, son. No. Caleb pulled up spreadsheets on his computer. Look at these projections. The environmental initiatives we're proposing. They're not just good PR, they're smart business. Sustainable development. Green energy partnerships. Richard studied the numbers, his expression unchanging. And the girl, is she as calculated a move as these projections? Don't. Caleb's voice was low, dangerous. Don't reduce her to a business strategy. Something in his tone made his father look up sharply. After a long moment, Richard spoke softly. You're in love with her. It wasn't a question. Caleb didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. You know what love costs in our world, son. Are you ready to pay that price? Before Caleb could respond, his phone buzzed again. Callie had sent a photo. She was at the dog shelter with Max, who'd become a regular visitor. The picture showed her laughing as Max covered her face with kisses, her braids catching the light, her joy unfiltered and real. Some things, Caleb said finally, are worth any price. Across town, Callie sat in her small apartment, surrounded by gala planning documents. Mrs. Rodriguez brought her a cup of tea, studying her young friend's worried expression. What's troubling you, Mijita? Everything's changing so fast. Callie looked up. The shelter partnership is amazing. The environmental initiatives are gaining support, but I'm scared, Mrs. R. His whole world is pushing back against these changes. Against me. What if... A knock interrupted her fears. Opening the door revealed Caleb, looking slightly disheveled. His tie loosened. Hey, he said softly. I needed to see you. Mrs. Rodriguez quietly excused herself as Caleb entered, his presence filling the small space. Rough day? Callie asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. My parents aren't happy. He moved to the window, where she'd set up a small herb garden. Actually, that's an understatement. They're furious. About the gala changes. About everything. You, the initiatives, all of it. He turned to face her. They think you're changing me. Am I? No. He stepped closer. You're just making me brave enough to be who I always wanted to be. The honesty in his voice made her heart skip. She reached up, straightening his tie automatically. And who is that? Someone worthy of you. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Callie's hands stilled on his tie. You don't need to change for me, Caleb. I'm not changing for you. He caught her hands in his. I'm changing because you made me realize I wanted to. Because for the first time, someone saw past all my walls and didn't run away. I'm not running, she whispered. I'm just scared of what happens when your world decides I'm not enough. You're more than enough. His voice was fierce. You're everything. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. They stood there, hearts racing, on the edge of something profound. Your mother called me today, Callie admitted quietly. Caleb stiffened. What? She offered to pay for my entire college education. All I had to do was walk away. Callie, I'm so sorry. I told her that some things aren't for sale. She met his eyes, including my heart. He pulled her close then, wrapping her in an embrace that felt like coming home. They stood there, holding each other as the setting sun painted her small apartment in shades of gold and shadow. "Stay for dinner?" she asked against his chest. "What are we having?" "Mac and cheese. Your grandmother's recipe." She pulled back to see his surprised expression. "Mrs. Rodriguez got it from Max's vet. Apparently your grandmother was a patient there too. She used to share her recipes." Caleb laughed, the sound full of wonder. "See? This is why I—" He caught himself, but his eyes said what his voice didn't. "Why you what?" Callie's heart thundered. Instead of answering, he kissed her forehead softly. "Let's make dinner. I want to see if we can do my grandmother's recipe justice." As they moved around her tiny kitchen, their movements in perfect sync, both knew that something fundamental had shifted. Love wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was a reality they were both choosing, despite the costs, despite the fears. Outside, Boston's evening lights began to twinkle, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things happen when day meets night, when different worlds collide, and when two people are brave enough to choose love over expectations. The mac and cheese turned out perfectly, just like his grandmother used to make. But the taste wasn't just in the ingredients. It was in the laughter they shared, the stories they told, and the unspoken understanding that some traditions are worth keeping, while others are meant to be changed. As they ate, sitting on her small balcony with the city spread out before them, Caleb realized that all his father's talk of empire building meant nothing compared to this. Simple food, honest conversation, and a love that felt as natural as breathing. The price of truth, they were both learning, was high, but the reward, that was priceless. The Boston Ritz-Carlton's grand ballroom buzzed with activity 3 days before the gala. Callie stood amid the chaos, clipboard in hand, directing volunteers while trying to ignore the whispers that followed her every move. She'd worn her favorite jeans and a simple sweater, standing out starkly among the designer suits and dresses of the planning committee. "The sustainable floral arrangements go by the east windows," she instructed a group of workers. "And remember, all leftover food is being donated to the local shelters." "How quaint," Victoria's voice cut through the room. She approached with several committee members, all wearing identical expressions of polite disdain. "Playing party planner, how resourceful of you." Before Callie could respond, Caleb's voice rang out. "Actually, she's revolutionizing how we approach these events." He strode over, looking impeccable in a charcoal suit. "The sustainable initiatives she's implemented have already garnered attention from major environmental organizations." Victoria's smile turned razor-sharp. "Darling, you've always had such a soft heart. But this isn't a college project. It's a sterling family tradition." "Traditions can change," Caleb replied firmly, placing a hand on Callie's lower back. "Can they?" Victoria raised an perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Your mother mentioned the board meeting this morning. Did you tell your little activist about that?" Callie felt Caleb tense beside her. "What board meeting?" "It's nothing," he said quickly. "Just routine business." "Nothing?" Victoria laughed. "Just, darling, your father giving you an ultimatum about your position in the company is hardly nothing." The clipboard nearly slipped from Callie's grasp. "What ultimatum?" "I was going to tell you," Caleb started, but Victoria interrupted. "The board isn't pleased with his recent changes in direction. They're questioning his judgment, and his father made it clear either he maintains the sterling legacy as it's meant to be, or he loses his position." "Simple business, really." Callie stepped away from Caleb's touch. "Were you going to tell me about this? Can we discuss this privately?" His eyes pleaded with her. "Yes, run along and discuss," Victoria smirked. "Though I should mention, the deadline for his decision is tomorrow morning." Callie turned and walked quickly toward the service exit, her heart pounding. Caleb caught up with her in the empty hallway. "Callie, wait. Your entire future is on the line, and you didn't tell me." She spun to face him. "Were you just going to carry this alone?" "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" "The truth." Her voice cracked. "I thought we were past masks and pretenses." "This isn't about masks." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. This is about not wanting you to carry the weight of this decision." "Because you've already made it." The question hung between them. "No, because—" His phone buzzed insistently. "Damn it." He checked the screen. "It's my father. The board wants to move the meeting up. They're waiting now." Callie wrapped her arms around herself. "Then you should go. Come with me. And watch you choose between your family legacy and whatever this is between us." She shook her head. "I can't." "Callie, please." "Go to your meeting, Caleb." She stepped back. "Some decisions we have to make alone." He reached for her, but she turned away. pushing through the service door into the back alley. The cold air hit her face as tears finally fell. Mrs. Rodriguez was waiting at her apartment with hot tea and understanding eyes. "Oh, menina, what happened?" "I was naive," Callie whispered, curling up on her small couch, thinking love could bridge different worlds. "Love can bridge anything," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly, "but both people have to want to build that bridge. He has to choose his family's legacy. I understand that. Do you? Or are you choosing for him by walking away?" Before Callie could respond, her phone lit up with a message from Angela. "Baby girl, pack a bag. I'm at the airport." "Mom, what? You think I wouldn't come when my daughter's heart is on the line? My flight lands in 2 hours." Across town, in the Sterling Industries boardroom, Caleb stood before the board members, his father's words echoing in his head. "The choice is simple, son. The life you were born to lead, or this fantasy you've been chasing." Caleb looked at the faces around the table, men and women who'd known him since childhood, who expected him to follow the path they'd laid out. Then he thought of Callie's face in that hallway, of her unwavering belief in doing what was right over what was easy. "No," he said quietly. "Excuse me." His father's voice was dangerous. "I said no." Caleb's voice grew stronger. "The choice isn't between the company and Callie. It's between being the man you want me to be and the man I actually am. Don't throw away your birthright for some girl. This isn't about her." Caleb slammed his hand on the table. "This is about me finally understanding what my grandmother tried to teach me, about realizing that a legacy isn't just what we inherit, it's what we choose to build." He pulled out his phone, bringing up the projections he'd prepared. "Mate, the initiatives we're implementing, they're not just good PR, they're the future. Sustainable business practices, community engagement, ethical investment. These aren't radical ideas, they're smart business. The board hasn't seen the full picture," Caleb interrupted his father, "but they will, because I'm not choosing between the company and my heart. I'm choosing to lead this company into a future I actually believe in." He turned to leave, then paused. "And father, Callie isn't some girl. She's the woman who reminded me that doing the right thing isn't a weakness. It's the greatest strength we have." As he drove through Boston's rain-slicked streets, his heart pounding with the weight of what he'd just done, his phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Rodriguez. "She's at the airport, Terminal C. Don't let fear win, mijito." Caleb looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, he recognized himself completely. No masks, no pretenses, just a man finally brave enough to fight for what he believed in and who he loved. He made a sharp U-turn heading toward Logan Airport. Sometimes, he realized, the hardest choices are the ones that lead us exactly where we need to be. Terminal C at Logan Airport hummed with the usual chaos of arriving flights and emotional reunions. Callie stood at the arrivals gate, watching as passengers streamed through the doors. Her heart leaped when she spotted her mother's familiar face in the crowd. Angela Hart moved with the same grace she'd always had, pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. "Let me look at you," she said, holding Callie at arm's length. "Your eyes are just like your daddy's when his heart was hurting." "I'm okay, Mum." Callie tried to smile, but her voice wavered. "Baby girl, you've never been good at lying." Angela squeezed her hand. "Now, tell me everything." They found a quiet corner in the airport coffee shop, and Callie poured out the whole story, the gala preparations, Victoria's revelation, the impossible choice facing Caleb. "So you ran," Angela observed, stirring her coffee. "So I gave him space to make his decision." "No, baby, you made it for him." Angela's voice was gentle but firm. "Just like I almost did with your father." Callie looked up sharply. "What? Did I ever tell you about the time I almost left your father?" When Callie shook her head, Angela continued, "It was before you were born. He'd just started his residency, and I was scared. Scared of loving someone whose world was so different from mine. Scared of not being enough. What happened? He found me at the bus station, said something I'll never forget. Love isn't about being enough. It's about being willing to grow together." Angela reached across the table. "Now your daddy taught me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stay and fight for love, even when we're scared." Before Callie could respond, a commotion near the coffee shop entrance drew their attention. Caleb stood there, slightly out of breath, his usual polished appearance somewhat disheveled, his eyes locked with Callie's across the space. "I'll give you two a moment," Angela said, standing. As she passed Caleb, she paused. "She's got her daddy's heart." Strong, but sometimes needs reminding it's okay to be vulnerable. Caleb nodded gratefully as Angela walked away. He approached Callie's table slowly, as if afraid she might flee again. "How did you know I was here?" "Mrs. Rodriguez," he admitted. "She's quite the matchmaker. The board meeting is over." He sat down across from her. "I told them I'm not choosing." Callie's heart clenched. "Oh, what do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not choosing between the company and you. I'm choosing to be the man who can have both, who can lead the company into a better future while being with the woman who showed him what that future could look like." "Caleb, let me finish." He reached for her hands across the table. "All my life, I've lived by other people's definitions of success, but you made me question everything. Not because you tried to change me, but because you believed I could be more than what everyone expected." "What did the board say?" A small smile played at his lips. "They're split, but I presented the projections for our sustainable initiatives. Turns out doing the right thing can also be good business. Who knew? And your father is furious." Caleb squeezed her hands. "But for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of his disapproval, because I finally understand what my grandmother tried to teach me, that true strength isn't in maintaining walls, it's in having the courage to let them down." The airport announcer's voice echoed overhead, announcing departures and arrivals, lives in transit. Callie looked down at their joined hands. "I was going to leave," she admitted quietly. "Not because I don't love you, but because I thought I was standing in the way of your destiny." "You are my destiny." The words came out with such certainty that she looked up, startled, not in some fairy tale way, but in the realest way possible. "You're the person who makes me want to be better, who challenges me to live authentically." "It won't be easy," she warned. "Your world, our world," he corrected. "Because I'm not asking you to join my world or leave yours, I'm asking if we can build something new together." From across the terminal, Angela watched the scene unfold. She saw the moment her daughter's resolve cracked, saw the way Caleb pulled Callie into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "They remind me of us," she whispered to the memory of her late husband. "Just as stubborn, just as real." The coffee shop barista had to clear her throat twice before the couple noticed her. They broke apart, laughing softly, their faces glowing with the kind of joy that comes after storm clouds clear. "Come home with me," Callie said suddenly. "To Atlanta for Thanksgiving, meet my family, see where I come from." "What happened to taking things slow?" Caleb teased, but his eyes were serious. "Maybe sometimes slow isn't about time. Maybe it's about being sure." She touched his face gently. "And I'm sure about you." Angela chose that moment to return, her smile knowing, "I take it I won't need that extra ticket back to Atlanta." "Actually, Mum," Callie looked at Caleb, who nodded. "We might need one more." As they left the airport together, the afternoon sun broke through Boston's clouds, casting long shadows across the terminal floor. Mrs. Rodriguez was waiting outside with Max, who greeted them with enthusiastic barks. "Took you long enough," she said, handing Caleb the leash. "Love isn't complicated, mijitos. People make it complicated." Looking at Callie's radiant smile as she knelt to hug Max, Caleb understood finally what his grandmother had tried to tell him all those years ago. Love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about choosing each other every day, through all the storms and sunshine. "Ready to go home?" he asked Callie. "Which home?" she teased. "Your penthouse or my tiny apartment?" "Wherever you are," he said simply. "That's home now." Angela watched them walk away, hand in hand, with Max trotting happily beside them. "Look at your baby girl," she whispered to the heavens. "She found someone who loves like you did, with his whole heart. No reservations." Boston's skyline glittered in the distance, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about worlds colliding, but about hearts finding their way home to each other, no matter what stands in their way. Atlanta in November was exactly as Callie had described: warm sunshine, crisp air, and trees painted in brilliant shades of red and gold. Caleb stood in the Hart family's kitchen, watching Callie and Angela move in perfect sync as they prepared Thanksgiving dinner. The small house in the historic West End neighborhood was filled with the aroma of Angela's famous mac and cheese and the sound of Alicia Keys playing softly in the background. "You're hovering, baby," Angela called over her shoulder, hands deep in pie dough. "Either help or go watch football with Uncle Marcus." "He's afraid of missing something," Callie teased, bumping Caleb with her hip as she passed. She looked different here, more relaxed, her braids pulled back with a colorful scarf, wearing one of his old college sweatshirts over leggings. "I just like watching you both," Caleb admitted. "It's like a choreographed dance." "Mama and Daddy used to cook like this," Callie said softly. She'd always say cooking is just love made visible. Angela wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes growing distant. "Your daddy would have liked him, baby girl. He had the same look when he was trying to figure something out, like he's studying every detail, wanting to get it just right." Before Caleb could respond, the front door burst open with a rush of autumn air and loud voices. Callie's cousins poured in, a whirlwind of energy and laughter that immediately enveloped him. "So you're the man who turned our Callie's head," Aunt Ruby announced, giving him an appraising look. "The one who chose love over legacy." "The news reached Atlanta?" Caleb asked, surprised. "Boy, everything reaches Atlanta when it comes to family." Uncle Marcus joined them, clapping Caleb on the shoulder. "Especially when it involves a sterling choosing heart over business." Callie watched nervously as her family surrounded Caleb, but she needn't have worried. He shed his usual corporate polish, rolling up his sleeves to help in the kitchen, listening intently to Uncle Marcus's stories about the neighborhood's history, and letting her young cousins teach him their secret handshake. Later, as the family gathered around the dining room table, extended with card tables to accommodate everyone, Aunt Ruby asked the question Callie had been dreading. "Now, when are you two making it official?" "Ruby!" Angela scolded, but her eyes held the same question. Caleb reached for Callie's hand under the table. "Actually, we've been talking about that." Callie's heart skipped. They hadn't discussed anything official, not really. Just quiet conversations about future possibilities, whispered dreams in the space between night and morning. "We're taking our time," she said quickly, "doing things our way." "Like the gala?" her youngest cousin piped up. "Mama showed me the article about how you changed everything." The Boston Globe article had come out the day before they left for Atlanta. "Sterling Air revolutionizes annual gala, a new era of corporate responsibility." The headline had read, the story detailed how they'd transformed the event into a genuine force for change, partnering with environmental organizations and local shelters. "Sometimes," Caleb said, squeezing Callie's hand, "the right person shows you a better way forward." After dinner, they escaped to the back porch, where string lights twinkled overhead, and the night air carried the scent of Angela's rose garden. Callie leaned against the railing, watching as Caleb took in the peaceful scene. "Different from your usual Thanksgiving?" she asked. "Better." He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "This is real, no pretense, no political maneuvering. Just family, even with all the chaos. Especially with the chaos." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Your family loves loudly, honestly. It's beautiful. They're your family too now," she said softly. "If you want them to be." He turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "I want everything with you, Callie. The loud family dinners, the quiet moments, all of it. Even though I'm just a college student who turned your world upside down. Because you're the woman who showed me my world needed turning." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "Which is why I asked your mother's permission this morning." Callie's breath caught. Caleb, I'm not proposing. Not yet." He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring with a simple pearl. "This was my grandmother's promise ring. She gave it to me before she died, said to save it for someone who made me want to be better." Tears filled Callie's eyes as he continued, "I want to do this right. Build our foundation, create our own traditions. This isn't a proposal, it's a promise. That when the time comes, when we're both ready, I'll ask you properly, because you deserve a love story that's written our way, not anyone else's." Inside the house, Angela watched through the window as her daughter accepted the ring. As Caleb gathered her in his arms under the string lights, she felt her late husband's presence strongly in that moment. "Look at our baby," she whispered. "She found a love like ours, one that changes everything but keeps you exactly who you are." The night wrapped around the house like a warm blanket, filled with the sounds of family, dishes being washed, cousins laughing, Uncle Marcus telling stories. On the porch, Callie and Caleb swayed gently to music only they could hear, the promise ring catching the light of the stars above. "Tell me what you're thinking," Caleb murmured. "I'm thinking about the night I found Max," Callie replied. "How sometimes the biggest changes in life start with the smallest choices, like helping a lost dog, like being brave enough to let someone see the real you." He lifted her hand, kissing the pearl that now rested on her finger. "Thank you for seeing me. The real me. Thank you for being worth seeing." Inside, Angela started playing the piano, an old soul song that had been her and Callie's father's favorite. The music drifted out to the porch, carrying with it the weight of legacy, the promise of future Saki, and the simple truth that sometimes love is less about grand gestures and more about quiet moments of choosing each other, again and again. "Dance with me?" Caleb asked, echoing their first real date at Angelo's. Callie smiled, remembering that night. No pretense. No pretense. Just us. And so they danced, their shadows merging with the night, while Atlanta's stars twinkled overhead and the promise of tomorrow stretched out before them like an unwritten story, waiting to be told in their own words, their own way, their own time. Spring painted Boston in shades of new beginnings. Cherry blossoms lined the paths where Callie and Max took their morning walks, their routine now as natural as breathing. 1 year had passed since that rainy night when she'd found a scared dog in an alley. 1 year that had changed everything. The morning sun streamed through the windows of their brownstone apartment, a perfect compromise between Caleb's desire for luxury and Callie's need for homey comfort. She sat at their kitchen island, surrounded by final project papers and environmental impact reports, while Caleb made breakfast. "The shelter expansion plans came through," he announced, sliding a plate of fresh fruit beside her laptop. "The board unanimously approved the funding." Callie looked up, her eyes bright. "Really? Even your father?" "Especially my father." Caleb's smile held a hint of pride. "Turns out our sustainable initiatives increased company value by 30% this year." He actually said, and I quote, "Sometimes the young ones see the future clearer than we do." She rose to wrap her arms around him, breathing in the familiar scent of his Bleu de Chanel mixing with coffee and morning air. "I'm proud of you." "Of us," he corrected, kissing her forehead. "None of this would have happened without you." Max barked from his bed by the window, making them both laugh. "And you," Caleb acknowledged, "the best matchmaker a man could ask for." Their moment was interrupted by a knock. Mrs. Rodriguez bustled in, carrying a tray of her famous empanadas. "Big day," she announced. "See my 2 favorite lovebirds ready to change the world again." Today marked the official launch of the Hart Sterling Foundation, their joint venture combining environmental conservation with community development. The project had been Caleb's surprise for Callie's graduation, a way to merge their worlds permanently. "Almost ready," Callie replied, gathering her papers. "Just finishing my speech." "Ah, mi niña." Mrs. Rodriguez touched her cheek. "Unless you don't need a speech. Just speak from your heart like you did that night in the rain." The launch event was being held at Angelo's, transforming the small restaurant into a gathering space for both worlds, corporate executives mingling with shelter volunteers, environmental activists chatting with board members. Uncle Angelo had insisted on hosting, saying, "Real change happens over real food, not fancy finger sandwiches." As they drove to the restaurant, Callie's hand found Caleb's, her grandmother's pearl ring catching the light. "Nervous?" he asked. "No," she smiled. "For the first time, everything feels exactly right." The restaurant was packed when they arrived. Victoria was there, surprisingly, her usual sharp edges softened by genuine interest in their work. Caleb's parents stood talking with Angela, who had flown in for the event. Even Richard Sterling looked different, less rigid, more open to the possibility of change. "Your father would be so proud," Angela whispered as she hugged Callie. "You didn't just follow your heart, you helped others find theirs too." Uncle Angelo clinked his glass for attention, and the room fell silent. Callie stepped up to speak, but Caleb touched her arm. "Wait," he said softly. "There's something I need to say first." He turned to face the crowd, his hand finding hers. "A year ago, I thought I knew what success looked like. I had the right clothes, the right connections, the right facade. Then one night, a young woman found my dog in the rain, and she didn't just save him, she saved me." His voice carried through the hushed room. "Callie taught me that real strength isn't in maintaining walls, but in having the courage to let them down. That true legacy isn't what we inherit, but what we choose to build." He turned to face her fully now, and Callie's heart stopped as he reached into his pocket. "You told me once that you weren't looking for a fairy tale," he continued, dropping to one knee. "You were looking for something real. So this isn't a fairy tale proposal. This is me, asking the most real person I know to build a life with me." The ring he held wasn't a traditional diamond. Instead, it was a delicate band of recycled gold, set with small sapphires the color of rain-washed skies. "Callie Hart." His voice softened to just for her, though the whole room held its breath. "Will you marry me?" Not because it's expected or traditional, but because together we can make the world a little bit better, a little bit kinder, a little bit more real. Through tears, Callie saw her mother's radiant smile, Mrs. Rodriguez's knowing nod, and Max's tail wagging furiously. But mostly she saw the man before her. No masks, no pretenses, just pure love and truth. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The room erupted in cheers as he slipped the ring beside her grandmother's pearl. Uncle Angelo broke out the special wine he'd been saving, and somewhere in the celebration, Victoria was heard saying, "Maybe I was wrong about what makes a perfect match." Later that night, they stood on their balcony, watching Boston's lights twinkle. Max dozed at their feet while distant music drifted up from the street. "Dance with me," Caleb asked, just as he had that first night at Angelo's. "Always," Callie replied, stepping into his arms. As they swayed under the stars, she thought about how love isn't always about grand gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes it's about a rainy night, a lost dog, and the courage to see beyond the surface to the truth underneath. "What are you thinking?" he murmured against her hair. "That some traditions are worth keeping," she replied, "like dancing with you under the stars. And some are worth changing," he added, "like what it means to build a legacy." From her apartment window, Mrs. Rodriguez watched them dance, remembering her own words from a year ago. Different worlds can make the strongest bridges if both people want to build them. And they had built something remarkable, not just a bridge between their worlds, but a whole new world of their own. One where love wasn't about changing who you are, but becoming more truly yourself together. The spring night wrapped around them like a promise fulfilled, while the city below hummed with possibilities. Their story wasn't ending. It was evolving, growing, becoming more real with each passing day. Because sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other, but about real people choosing each other, every day, in all the small moments that make up a life. And in the end, that's the most perfect kind of love story there is. 5 years later, the rain fell softly over Boston's streets, bringing with it memories of a night that changed everything. Callie Sterling stood at the window of their brownstones nursery, watching droplets trace patterns on the glass. Behind her, Caleb's voice carried softly through the baby monitor as he read a bedtime story to their 3-year-old daughter, Luna. "And then the brave princess saved the lost puppy," Callie smiled, remembering how Luna had insisted on hearing Mommy and Daddy's story every night this week. Of course, the toddler-friendly version focused more on the dog rescue than the complex journey that followed. But the essence remained the same. Sometimes love finds us in the most unexpected moments. Max, now graying around the muzzle but still devoted as ever, lay protectively by Luna's bed. These days, he split his time between guarding his little human sister and helping Callie assess new shelter dogs, a job he took very seriously. The Hart Sterling Foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams, spawning a network of environmental initiatives and community programs across the country. But their greatest pride was the scholarship program, helping young dreamers bridge different worlds just as they had. "She's finally asleep," Caleb whispered, wrapping his arms around Callie from behind. His reflection in the window showed the same love she'd seen that night at Angelo's, only deeper, richer with time and shared experiences. "Your father called earlier," she said, leaning back against him. "The latest green energy project is exceeding expectations. He actually said, 'My brilliant daughter-in-law was right again, didn't he?' Maybe." She turned in his arms, smiling. "Ready for tomorrow?" Tomorrow would mark the grand opening of their latest project, a state-of-the-art veterinary hospital and shelter complex, built on the very spot where Callie had found Max all those years ago. Mrs. Rodriguez would cut the ribbon, insisting she'd earned the right as their original matchmaker. "Speaking of tomorrow," Caleb said, "Mom asked if Luna can stay with them after the ceremony. Something about a surprise. Angela's in on it too, isn't she? They've been whispering all week. Can't a man plan an anniversary surprise without everyone knowing? Not in this family," she laughed. Not anymore. Their family had grown in beautiful ways. Angela and Richard Sterling hosting Sunday dinners together, Uncle Angelo teaching Luna to make pasta, Mrs. Rodriguez spoiling them all with her empanadas. Different worlds had not just merged but flourished, creating something entirely new and wonderful. The rain continued its gentle symphony as they stood together, watching Boston's lights shimmer through the mist. Some things hadn't changed. Callie still wore daisy perfume, Caleb still made his grandmother's cheeseburgers, and they still danced in their kitchen late at night. But other things had grown deeper, stronger. Their love had weathered board meetings and midnight feedings, charity galas and quiet Sunday mornings. It had transformed from a spark of possibility into a steady flame, warming everyone around them. "But dance with me," Caleb whispered, just as he had so many times before. And there, in the soft glow of their sleeping daughter's nightlight, with Max watching contentedly and rain tapping gentle rhythms outside, they swayed together, two souls who had dared to build bridges, change traditions, and choose love in all its real, messy, beautiful glory. Because sometimes the greatest love stories don't end with happily ever after. They simply keep beginning every single day. The end. At what point did you know that you had to choose between following the expectations of others or being true to your own heart? Just as Callie and Caleb discovered, sometimes love asks us to be brave and authentic, even when that means challenging everything we know. What was your experience of making this choice, and how did it change your life? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.